Hello and welcome to the Fulhamish podcast. It's your independent voice of Fulham FC, and we're back on a Thursday with the Thursday Club for the final time in the regular season as we look forward to our last game at the Cottage against Manchester City. And of course, we'll have the final word as well on that wonderful win at Legoland, beating the Bees 3-2 on their own turf. Harry Wilson, he's done it again. I'm Jack Collins and I'll be your host today, and joining me it's Miss Elizabeth Barnard. How you doing, Liz?
I'm really well. I couldn't be better after that result on Sunday, to be honest. How are you, Jack?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm really good. It's been a wild season in many ways, and it feels like we've kind of hit the wall at the end of it. And last weekend felt like the culmination of everything. It was the last thing where anything was really on the line, and whilst we knew obviously that really European football was out of the question beforehand, I think it was about that level of local pride that we talked about on last week's Thursday Club. This was about just making sure that we finished the season on a high. Morale took a major boost after a couple of difficult weeks, shall we say. But it was glorious, and I think that's really the only place to start. I mean, what were your feelings? At half-time, I was absolutely despondent.
Yeah, I decided while I was watching the game, which I did kind of between my fingers, as I always do with the derby match. I get really excited in the lead up thinking we're going to show them who's boss, etc., etc. And then as soon as the whistle blows and the game kicks off, I just feel like this intense feeling of panic overcome my body. Or I think there's so much on the line. It feels so important. And I know from previous derby matches we've won, like how much I'm going to revel in this if we do win, and how if we don't win, I'm going to squirm at absolutely everything that comes out about it over the last few days. I created this narrative in my head when Bernd Leno saved the penalty that was the turning point that put the game towards Fulham. It wasn't.
No.
Like, it absolutely wasn't. I don't know what I was thinking. I think I was clinging on some desperate kind of hope. We were incredibly lucky that we didn't go into the break 3-1 down, and I think at that point the game would have been over. So yeah, very, very despondent for the first half. When we scored, there was almost like a crushing sense of inevitability, and I like to think of myself as an optimist, but when we score like that, Fulham is early, I thought, we've thrown away so many leads this season. We did it against Everton last week. It's going to happen again. Going into half-time, I was feeling pretty dejected, but, the rest is history. The
rest is history, indeed. I mean, I think the thing was with the goal that it came against the run of play on top of everything else. Like with Everton, when we took the lead, I was like, with the better side here, right? And we were the better side for the majority of that first half. I don't think that was the case for the first half against Brentford. Now, Marco Silva obviously furious about the penalty that was given. I thought it was harsh, though I'd want it at the other. I'd want it at the other end. So it's one of those where, I was in a pub watching it in Hanwell, and there was obviously a lot of Brentford around as well. And it kind of just was one of those things where half the pub was just really giving it large, and there was just me and my brother just sort of tucked in the corner. And when Leonard saved it, I shouted, "Justice!" And it was like one of those moments I was like, this might not end particularly well. And then obviously they score about 5 minutes later. I really put myself in it here. And, you're sitting there at half time and like, why are we doing this? Like, what's here? What's the joy? And it's such a frustration in terms of the way that Fulham performed, I think, in that first half. Because, yes, obviously we get the goal and it's a great breakaway. But I just didn't really understand what the game plan was in terms of trying to get back at Brentford. Once it went to 1-1, it was one-way traffic. And when you kind of see it like that, you're thinking, how are you going to overturn this away from home? Who have we got on the bench that's going to make a difference? And obviously he brings on Tom Cairney. And I think that I had question marks over whether that was going to lead us being overrun in midfield from a kind of physical standpoint, but it didn't. And you actually look at the possession stats from the first half and the second half, and the way that Fulham failed to control the ball for pretty much the entirety of that first half. And obviously game states come into play here, right? Like one of those halves, you're in the lead for some of it, or at least, level against a team away from home. And in the second half, you're chasing the game a little bit more. But the switch in terms of control and the way that Fulham played in that second half lent so much to TC. And I think that's kind of, the goal is great. And the goal is obviously amazing. And the celebrations are brilliant. And the bit at the end of the game is great. But actually him coming on there changed the game even before he got his head onto that deflected cross. And I think that actually the way that he carried himself in a game like this, after a couple of weeks where his impetus has been probably, if not neutral, net negative slightly, there is then a sense that you're like, oh, these are the games that he can still control. These are the games that he still has a major part to play in the Premier League. And I think that was something that really did allow Fulham to claw their way back in and take control of a game that looked like it was slipping away from them.
Absolutely. I feel it's not, it would be revisionist for me to pretend that I was pleased when the substitution happened. I feel like Tom Cairney at points this season has felt like he hasn't quite got the legs for it anymore. And it's felt very challenging because Cairney is my favourite player, to don the shirt, etc., etc. But when he came on, I thought against a very physical Brentford team, taking off Sanderberger, this isn't just not the move at all. I was so pleased to be proven wrong. We really dominated that second half entirely and totally deserved to come out winners after it, which when we went in half time was just something I thought we wouldn't be saying.
Yeah, no, that was it. Like it was such a game of two halves. I know it's a cliche, but like you're looking at it and thinking there is no way that if someone had switched off at half time, had gone, there's one team winning this. It was not Fulham. Right? Like that's the way that the first half played out. And Marco Silva's been criticised in recent weeks for his substitutions, and I think rightly so, in terms of some of the games that have slipped away from us in moments and not being able to kind of wrest that control back. This was the complete opposite. And look, now Fulham have had more goals from substitutes than any other team in Premier League history over the course of a single season. And we've smashed that record by 2 now at this point with a game to go. So you're looking at it and thinking, well, something's going right. It doesn't mean that everything's right, and that's fine. But like some things are definitely going right. And that impetus when there is players on the bench who are able to make a difference is a really important one. And actually, I thought that Harry Wilson coming on and scoring was not only wonderful for a narrative perspective, right? But like actually the way that he went at Brentford and he sort of made things happen, and you see his influence in the goal that Cairney scores as well, in terms of driving through the middle and trying to make things happen. It goes out wide and then it ends up being a headed goal. But actually then he picks up the ball and he drives through Brentford again and he unleashes an absolute bullet, like a glorious, glorious strike. But these are the kind of moments with that and Josh King, who I thought was really impactful in the centre of the park. And, I think Sammy and I talked about this last week, but there is a level with Josh King that they feel comfortable giving the ball, right? There's no worries about having him or someone so young or an academy product who's quite slight. There's no stress when he gets the ball. Players are willing to pass to him in those areas. And you can look back, and it doesn't always mean that player is going to go on and be a superstar. But when you see like a Tom Cairney in here picking out Josh King and being like, yeah, okay, I can give him the ball with 3 players around him. That's absolutely fine. He's not going to lose it. It's reminiscent of some of the kind of other youngsters bursting onto the scene and you're going, wow, they've got it. Whatever it is, they have it so early. And the only thing I'm really hoping for is that next season we see more from Josh King. Absolutely.
I think the natural feeling with Fulham, or youngsters in general, is that you don't want to overwhelm them. You don't want to thrust them in before they're ready. You don't want to put them in difficult situations. But Sunday at the G-Tech was a fantastic performance by Josh King, and that is a difficult situation. However much we were dominating in that half, we weren't dominating in separately from him. We were dominating in part because of him on the pitch in a derby game that means loads to both teams. He was able to run that midfield in a way that was so impressive. In terms of Harry Wilson, obviously the narrative of it is beautiful.
It's great. And
I wasn't lucky enough to be at the G-Tech. I was watching from my sofa and hearing as the game started, like the loudest thing was obviously the Fulham fans chanting for Wilson, and then him coming off the bench and having that cheeky smile that like he knew that he could do something special. And then like to shoot from there, he should not be shooting from there.
But we've been crying out for people to have a go from distance for weeks.
Can I say should not be shooting from there because it's so audacious, not because I'm like, oh, he really shouldn't have shot from there. Yeah. And it's so enjoyable. And his face when he scored as well, those kind of moments, that's what following this team this season has been all about. So yeah, just like an absolutely game-changing set of substitutions. I think really the substitution things generally, I've been very critical of Marco, praised Marco a lot. It's a similar kind of story to this like absolutely bonkers stat from a few weeks ago about how Fulham have dropped loads of points from winning position and picked up loads of points from losing positions. And it feels like we're never in the middle. They're never like just about fine. They don't, they're either amazing and totally change the game, or they're a disaster and mean we lose control. And it's really difficult to find that balance. But like we talk a lot about the definition of Fulhamish on the podcast, that feels like something it is. It feels like following Fulham sometimes feels like we're swinging between these extremes. We never just have a normal straightforward win. At least we haven't this season.
No, we don't win games 2-0.
We don't against teams who are expected to be.
That's just not how it works, sadly. That's you'd be more worried about us going 1-0 up than going 1-0 down at this point, which is a bizarre concept for all of it. But look, it's been fun and it's been a wild roller coaster of a season. And look, I don't think, Marco came out afterwards. We hit our record points total, said I don't think anyone can suggest that this season's been a failure. And for what it's worth, I agree with him. I think that you can look at it and say, look, how much have we achieved in terms of the first win at Stamford Bridge, the double over Brentford, record points total, the most substitutes coming off a bench and scoring, like having the ability to change games. All of those things are great. Equally, I think this was an opportunity that we have potentially let slip a little bit from and not in games. I'm not stressed about us losing 1-0 to Bournemouth, away from home. That doesn't bother me in the same way that dropping points against Southampton, dropping points against Ipswich in games that no one else has hugely struggled with this season. They're the games that you look back at and think, really, were they the ones that got away from us this season? But equally, you'd probably look at some of the wins and say that we've dragged ourselves out of situations that no one would have expected us to. So I do take his point. Just finally on the Brentford game and finally on Harry Wilson, I really like the new lid. I'm really big fan.
Yeah,
big
it's
fan
good
of
on
Harry
him.
Wilson's new haircut.
Yeah, it's good on him. I agree.
Good.
Really
That's
suits
it.
him.
That's all I've got, really. That was it.
Yeah.
But seeing him floating away with it, sort of streaming behind him in the breeze, I was like, yes, Harry.
And he's had some questionable ones over the years.
Yeah.
For sure. Your point about this being an emotional or an odd season as well, in terms of having good and bad, having the extremes of good and bad. I would much rather have it that we beat Liverpool at home and lost to Gary O'Neill's Wolves at home than lost 2-1 to Liverpool at home and beat Gary O'Neill's Wolves 2-0.
Yeah. So,
I mean, obviously,
I know what you mean.
Let's be honest, I wish we'd won every game. But
yes.
That's where I'm at least with that. I feel very, very grateful.
Should we come on to the weekend? Because we come up against Manchester City, who we will probably see at Craven Cottage, Kevin De Bruyne's last game as a Premier League player, unless he decides he wants to stay at the Cottage, which is a possibility, but I know we're going to talk about that later.
A question about that.
So look, this is a game now that City really need a point in order to guarantee Champions League football, but I think they're pretty much there in terms of what they need. Fulham can't really shift too much in the table. We can go 1 up and 1 down, I think, depending on how other results look, but I think it's probably going to be around about this sort of 10th, 11th spot. Now, obviously, it'd be good to finish in the top half, but ultimately, in the grander scheme of things, I don't think it's going to affect how this season has been viewed by the fan base. So it kind of makes for a strange atmosphere, this one, because it's a bit of a, I watched the Kevin De Bruyne farewell last night on Sky Sports, and it was incredibly emotional for someone who is not an emotional player and for someone who I have no direct connect to. I
thought you were going to say you weren't an emotional man, and I was going to correct you.
I'm an incredibly emotional person, but I have no emotional link to Kevin De Bruyne apart from really enjoying him watching him playing football over the last sort of 10 years and the way that he's played. But he's not a particularly emotional person. It was still ooh, he's got lumps in throats here all around the place. So look, it's nice for him that he gets to play his last game as a Manchester City player at the nicest ground in the Premier League. It's a great 100%. Send-off for him, in the sun, by the Thames. And maybe he'll take one look at this and just think, I could do a bit of this next year, couldn't I?
Yeah. We'll come on to it, but I don't think that's necessarily on the cards. Yeah, I also found it very emotional. Again, I find Kevin De Bruyne so interesting because he just sometimes feels so clinical about the way he goes about things. And watching his interviews and stuff, he's often quite reserved, it seems, publicly. But I found the farewell to the Etihad very emotional. I'm hopeful, but doubt that this will be a bit of an after the Lord's Mayor show kind of vibe for him and the team after that really emotional game at the Etihad. Maybe they come and they're a little bit tired or whatever. Having said that, Manchester City at home, when have we ever got anything?
Well, I was asked a couple of times by friends this week who support teams who are fighting for these Champions League places, Villa and Newcastle and Chelsea, and they'd be like, oh, well, it would be great if Fulham had something to play for because, they might be more, competent in terms of trying to face up City and take something off them. And I was like, you should be incredibly grateful that we've got nothing to play for, because we are far more likely to actually turn up and play against City with nothing on the line. If there was something to play for here, we were losing 4-0, right?
100%. I actually was thinking the other day about our FA Cup run. We made it so difficult in those like huge games against Wigan, League One, against Manchester United, terrible,
League
and famously against Crystal Palace. Like the games where we had stuff to play for this season, we have been dreadful, and like in these crunch games in the European race against Bournemouth and Chelsea. But I do think we could have a bit of a party, and I see this as quite reminiscent of the Liverpool game. Nobody was expecting us to get anything there, and we weren't expecting it. And even the most optimistic Fulham fan in their race for Europe had that game down as a loss, and we managed to win it. So, you never know.
No, I think there's a relative chance that we come out of this with something. I don't think we win it. But I think I wouldn't be absolutely stunned if Fulham draw this game 2-2. Like, as you say, last day at the Cottage, they have a little bit more to play for. I expect to see a relatively experimental lineup from Marco Silva here. And look, that's obviously the players who are within their systems and who potentially need to finish the season strong will play. But if Anthony Robinson's injury is as bad as has been over recent weeks in that he's missed games, I feel like they maybe just go, right, you get on the surgery table, please. So we potentially see Cesc at left back. I wonder if we see a bit of like Jorge Cuenca in this game. I wonder if Josh King gets a run out from the start. I think that Harry probably starts on the right-hand side. I think if Iwobi plays here, he'll have completed the 38-game season, and potentially Bassi as well. So they were featured in every game in the Premier League for them this season. We assume Bernd Leno will complete that task. But for outfield players, that's a pretty cool thing to have in the tank as well. So that would be nice to see in many ways. But I do wonder what he does with the rest of the squad and who plays in this. Wouldn't be surprised to see TC start here. There are obviously question marks over whether this is TC's last game for Fulham, and that's an emotional one that we're all going to have to deal with. And actually, I saw this online earlier. Someone saying, I kind of wish the club would make a decision here before this game, because it would be nice if this is Tom Cairney's last game for us to be able to send him off in the fashion that he deserves after what he's done for this club. So obviously there is a sense of being like, oh, is he going to do another year? Is he going to stay? And I know that you don't rush those decisions and they need to be thought through properly. But it would be a shame if he was to depart and we didn't know about it at this point, to not be able to give Tom Cairney the send-off he deserves. But perhaps that comes in a testimonial.
I don't think there's going to be a Tom Cairney testimonial, for what it's worth, just straight off the bat, which is disappointing, but I don't think it will happen. It being Tom Cairney's last game, it's actually honestly difficult to talk about while not having tears in my eyes. Tom Cairney has been the constant in the last decade supporting Fulham. It's the most important player. All those memories from the playoff final to goals when we were coming back up under Marco, that goal against Cardiff after he'd been out injured, all of that. It's really difficult to think about saying goodbye. I will just go to the Cottage on Sunday and treat it like it is, because I don't want to be not that he'll be like, where's Elizabeth Barnard, but I don't want to be heading off to the pub and not giving him his, not clapping him properly on the lap of honour and then never see him again. No.
But they will do that. There will be a lap of honour. There was, but we've just talked about this send off for De Bruyne, right? As in, if this is Tom Cairney's last game, he should be being walked out by the rest of the squad, a guard of honour.
No, that is true.
That he should be giving a speech to the Cottage. There should be all of these things if this is his last game. And obviously it's more difficult in this situation because decisions haven't been made, and I get it, but there needs to be some element of that, because he has been such a wonderful footballer, such a wonderful servant to this club. He has been the midfield maestro, the creative fulcrum. He has been everything to so many iterations of this Fulham team. My brother and I were talking about this watching the game when he came on, and we were both a bit frustrated at halftime. We're maybe Tom Cairney will go back into 2016 mode and start snapping people and getting red cards like he did in those really early days. And you kind of think back and you're like, wow, that was an iteration of Tom Cairney that we saw playing on the right hand side of a midfield four, and scoring that wonderful goal from there, and it was the start of so many. But the different elements of TC we've seen, the kind of number 10 as being the absolute fulcrum of everything we did in an attacking sense, and then dropping deeper, coming into the midfield, then returning to the number 10 role in a sort of like part-time role, and then returning to the base of midfield, all of the different versions and variations. And he has given so much to this club that I would be absolutely devastated if his farewell and his send-off, whether that be now or whether that be in a year, is not treated with the same kind of gravitas and respect that I think we saw yesterday. Obviously, it's not going to get the coverage on Sky and all of those things. Fine, like that's okay. But I think we're seeing with TC, you know, we're starting to see him more on those Soccer Saturday roles where he's, you know, that move into the media is a real potential one that we're going to see in the future. This Wrexham offer that's potentially on the table. Look, if he's going to go on 5 times his wages at Wrexham, then good luck to him, you know, like go make that bag, my guy. But like, it does feel like if this is it, there should be, like the entire day should be about him. The entire, you know, at that point, if this is announced before the game, the result becomes secondary. The game
100%.
becomes secondary. I think the result is kind of already secondary. Like the game itself, though, becomes secondary to what this is and what this means. And that kind of service and that kind of consistency that we've seen from Tom Cairney deserves everything.
I obviously absolutely agree with you. I just don't see it, because obviously the decision has not been made or hasn't been finalised in a way that it can be made public. I don't see that happening over the next few days. I am very concerned and worried that it will be the goodbye that Tim Ream got. As in, we all clapped him and said and sang for him the last day of the season at Luton, and it was great, and he was pushed forward and he clapped the fans, and then he went via like an Instagram video.
Yeah, and then he comes back for a Forever Fulham award where everyone's in the bar.
Yeah.
We can't be having that, I'm afraid.
Yeah, Tim Ream deserves, and Tom Cairney deserve more than a Forever Fulham at half time when we're like, you know, losing 2-1 to Wolves or whatever. Like, yeah. It's a very...
I'm going to move you on from this because I'm worried that you're going to break before we get to the
Just
half-time
hear my
point of this
voice
podcast.
wobbling, yeah.
I can hear it. I can hear the little tremors already at this
goodness.
point. Look, we will see how it goes, but it would be nice for some sort of finality to be involved if this is going to be the end of TC's wonderful, wonderful time at Fulham. Right, we're going to take a break there. When we come back, we'll be answering a load of your questions. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome back to part 2 of the Fulhamish podcast. I'm Elizabeth Barnard and I'm still here with Jack Collins. Before we start part 2, just a little shout out before the game if you're heading on Sunday. Last one of the season, which means your last Craft Beer Co. pint of the season. It's a lovely independent family run pub in Hammersmith Broadway. Does amazing craft beers on tap, from gorgeous pilsners to fruity ciders to my favourite, which is a cookies and cream stout. Really, really delicious. Really, really interesting beers. So if you're doing a little pub crawl down the river on your way to the game on Sunday, make sure you check it out. Jack, I believe you have a signed shirt giveaway to tell me about.
Yes, I do. We've got a signed shirt to give away that we mentioned on last week's Thursday Club. The raffle is still running for the signed shirt. So all you got to do is go to the Just Giving page. The link is in the description of this podcast. Each £10 is one entry. We've currently raised over £600, all going to the Fulham FC Foundation. But we're hoping to make that 1,000. So if you fancy getting your hands on a signed shirt, many of this year's squad all over this one, then get over to that Just Giving page and get involved. At the very least, you're giving a bit of money to our wonderful cause. And at the best, you win a brilliant signed shirt. So what are you waiting for? Go on that link.
I have got some wonderful emails for you, Jack, this week.
Let's go.
To round off Thursday clubs in the regular season, although they will still be persisting,
Yes,
of course.
we're not stopping.
Thankfully, to clarify. I'll start with this one from Richard Hurst about a topic that we've touched on earlier. Hi, team. If Tom Cairney leaves for Wrexham, would Kevin De Bruyne be his ideal replacement as our geriatric midfielder?
Geriatric? Wow. I don't think either of them are going to stay or come if we're calling them geriatrics at this point. So I'd be careful about the wording on that one, Richard. But I mean, look, I tweeted yesterday being like, look, what happens if City come down to the Cottage, final day of the season, they give Kevin De Bruyne a really emotional farewell, he just stays. Like, he just stays at the Cottage, and the family. He's talked about the fact that he wants to stay in the Premier League, and he's been very clear that he would have liked to have stayed at City, and that's fine. But I don't think he's going to go to a direct rival. So I can't imagine Kevin De Bruyne rocking up at a Liverpool or a Manchester United or even like a Newcastle at this point. Although I think they probably would have the best shot of the lot of the big guns. Maybe Villa would get involved at this. But I think if you went to him, look, mate, come live on the banks of the Thames, family have a lovely gaff. You get to spray balls around this beautiful ground for all of next season. Do you fancy it? He might just be like, yeah, go on then. That sounds wicked. That sounds wicked. I'd love to play with Rodrigo Muniz. I'd love to play with Sasha Lukic. These are the guys and the only problem I think we'd have is that I don't think Big Alex is going to be giving up his 17 shirt. I think if you went to Alex Iwobi, mate, can we have the 17 for Kevin De Bruyne? He'd be like, no. He's like, that's my shirt. And you know what? I would respect it. So that's, I think, where our biggest roadblock is on this.
Right. I have been, because I was, we know when the news was announced that he wanted to stay in the Premier League, but he was leaving Manchester City. It feels like his wages might be a bit of a roadblock.
You're still on 1 year though, right? Surely.
But coming to us.
You can have the Willian wages. Willian can go. That's fine. He's done his bit. Thank you for your service. You've been great. First time. But like this time, there's definitely some wages there. We must have put Willian on some whack.
Wages. Yeah, it would be. I mean, he's going to take a significant pay cut wherever he goes now, I reckon.
Yeah. I don't think there's that many clubs that can afford to just chuck wages at Kevin De Bruyne.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that like Fulham would be a nice place for him to continue. Like Man City fans wouldn't hate that.
No, they wouldn't.
City fans would be like, that's quite nice. Like he's just there, like knocking the ball around at Fulham for a bit. We'd have reinvent him in a deeper role. He could play alongside Sasha. Have a great time. I think this would be perfect. I like it a lot.
Another great haircut as well.
Yeah, exactly. The family would feel very comfortable. They could sit in the Cottage. Maybe we should host them this weekend, actually. Like, that's what we should do, right? Also, I think this is an important point. I think when he goes off, the entire Cottage should stand up and give him a standing ovation. That's the kind of thing that could sway a man's mind.
Yeah,
when he does get his moment, I think we should give Kevin De Bruyne the respect. To be honest, we should be giving him anyway because he's been unbelievable in the Premier League. But that might help, That might just swing it in our favour.
A little bit of getting in his head, I think. Yeah, in a good way.
Just be like, we really, really like you, Kev. You could just stay.
Yeah, maybe
we've got a good history with Kevins as well. Right. Kevin Keegan did a good job here. Obviously, Kevin McDonald was a legend.
Yeah.
There you go. Next one could be Kevin De Bruyne.
It would, and
he's teammates with Timmy Castagna for Belgium. Maybe Timmy could have a word. I'm trying to genuinely talk myself into this.
I'm hearing a man who is desperate for it to happen.
It would that's the kind of thing that would genuinely absolutely send me through the rafters. Like, obviously, but like seeing a player of his caliber and quality, and I still think he's got loads left to give.
100%.
Like signing for Fulham, that's the kind of signing that goes, we mean business next season. That's the kind of signing that other players are like, hang on, I might go and sign for them. Just sign Kevin De Bruyne. That's the kind of thing that elevates your status.
I mean, I absolutely agree with you, and I would love to see it. I don't think it will happen, but I hope the weather's nice on Sunday at least, so he gets the experience of playing at the Cottage in the sunshine rather than sort of cloud or drizzle.
He's had great experiences here as well. Have they not beaten us 14 times in a row or something? Like, their winning record against us is absurd.
Yeah, maybe he'll be able to be on the wrong side of that.
Next year.
Maybe this weekend.
Maybe this weekend.
My next question is from Dimitri Kondonis. A really good question, a bit of a long one, but definitely worth chatting about, especially for you, King of Narrative. Hi team. Firstly, thanks for all the podcasts. I've recently moved back to Sydney, so in lieu of going to the Cottage, they all help with prolonging the celebrations, or of late, act as group therapy. Do we as a team buy into football narrative too much? This is not a criticism of Silva or the players, just think it may speak to a mental fragility over the last few years. Ever since Silva came in, I feel like I've watched the same few matches on repeat. The main example of this is the game against a team in a low block at the Cottage. Repeat patterns always ending in aimless crosses and few, if any, goals, or rarely enough to get us the win. In these games, when I was sitting in the hammy end, it would basically take 15 minutes to think, it could be another one of those games. But I get the impression that the players think that too. Now this season, we've managed to have these awesome moments where we flip a game at the end, but we've also got that awful record of losing points from winning positions. A lot of those games have felt really similar too. Hell, I even joked about losing when we scored early against Everton, with the complacency that it couldn't possibly happen again. Funny one there. In those games, when things start going wrong, I again get the impression that something in these players makes them think it's happening again. Another prime example of this mindset is every league match we've had versus United in what feels like forever, and then in brackets, the last 4 years. In short, I don't know what the fix is here. Make it stop. Keen to hear your thoughts, Dimitri.
It's a great question. I mean, look, we talked about it briefly earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
About the fact that we're almost more likely to win from going 1-0 down than going 1-0 ahead, which is a ludicrous position for any team to be in. But I do think that there is a level, and Sammy and I talk about leadership on the Thursday Club quite a lot, right? Like, and actual players who have the wherewithal that when we do concede, it's like, right, bang your heads together. Like, that is not happening again. And I think that whilst there are major advantages to this being like a super happy camp, and I think it is, right? Like, I think this is a really good place to be as a player. I think that everyone's enjoying it. I think there's a lot of like camaraderie, and that's the reason I think we can come from behind. Like, that's the reason that later on they're like, come on, we're like, let's have a go at this. Let's see what happens. We've done it before. Whereas I do wonder, in those things where you're just a little bit backed against the wall, if there is, you just need a slightly firmer hand. And those firmer hands that we had last season in the likes of a Tim Ream, for example, in terms of how it shakes out, just slightly changes what's going on. And, just someone to just be like, okay, there's an adult in the room. And I say that with all love and respect. I don't mean it in terms of a negative, but I think it's quite a playful bunch, right? And that's okay, and that's great. But like when you do get into these sticky situations, you kind of want someone who's just been like, all right, okay, playtime's over now. Like it is time to actually get their heads in the game and make sure that this happens. And so, as I said before, I think I thought Joachim Andersen was going to be that player. For what it's worth, and I've been critical of late, I thought he was excellent against Brentford. I really did. I thought that he marshalled that back line brilliantly and actually won every duel that he needed to win in the key areas. I think he was unlucky, obviously, to give away the pen, but he bounced back from that and really did do a job at the heart of the defence. So huge credit to him on that regard. But I do wonder if all of that plays into the same kind of categories, right? You just need someone who's just a little bit more cool-headed. I think we're a bit hot-headed, and that has ramifications at both times. I mean, it gives us that ability to come from behind. It gives us that ability to think this game isn't finished. We can go and I think it's quite a good thing against big teams because it's a fearlessness that we play with. But I do think that, sometimes against smaller teams, do you just quiet that down a bit? Do you just be like, right, we just need to get the job done? To Dimitri's point here, like tactically, I think that we very much do rely on like a certain set of patterns. I do think that tends to reset at the start of every year. And I think that's part of why we start years really fast, because we get the summer, there are these new patterns of play that are developed. Silva comes up with all of these different ideas. They're implemented over the course of pre-season. I also think this is one of the reasons why players struggle if they don't get full pre-seasons with Marco Silva in terms of movement and understanding the patterns that are coming in. But about halfway through the season, I reckon teams have kind of worked it out a little bit. And suddenly it's like, well, if you don't allow Fulham the space to just throw 3 players down the left-hand side and let Jedi overlap, then they're going to have to work things out in a different way. And we haven't got loads of players who can kind of unlock those kind of situations. I think that Willian in his first spell was very good at opening those situations up for us, and this time round has not been able to have the same kind of effect. That's okay. But when you look at what you can do we need someone who's a little bit more explosive in those areas? Does that need to be someone who has a little bit more guile? How do you balance that in the second half of a season? I don't think we've quite worked that out yet, and that's okay. But like there comes a point where if you want to kick on again, you do have to work out those situational elements, and you do have to work out how you kind of reinvent yourself mid-season to do different things. And I think Fulham are pretty one-dimensional is the wrong word, because we have different facets to the way we can play, but we're like set up and we have like plan A, plan B, plan C. And if none of them are working, or if plan C doesn't make sense against a team who is sitting in a low block in front of us, because that's our plan when we play against a team away from home who are better than us, who want to dominate the ball, I don't think we have too much deviation from what we're doing in terms of our ideas. And that's something that probably does need to change if we are going to kick on and go and win a trophy or go and qualify for Europe. I think that's the kind of thing that like a Palace have in the second half of this season, where they've been able to adapt their game plan, even though it's based on an obvious model.
For sure. I think to touch on the first half of Dimitri's question about whether we're getting too swept up in the narrative of how good Silva is and how many good times we've had, and we're not necessarily looking at the difficult parts, especially the last few weeks. I do think the last few weeks have brought them to the fore, but I think especially over the last 2 seasons, not so much the season before, but Fulham haven't quite been as under the radar, and they have been mentioned in those conversations about the best managers in the Premier League outside of your Slots and your Peps. And I think part of that is that a lot of our losses are sort of last on match of the day losses, or our disappointing results, like that 0-0 draw with Southampton is last on match of the day for
Yeah.
that 4-1 Wolves loss. Again, that's probably not that high up the running order, even though there are a lot of goals. But our big wins
go top of the running order.
Top of the running order.
Yeah.
Like, thinking about Liverpool, that was the first thing on every sheet when we beat Manchester United in the Cup. Whereas the 0-1 loss to Manchester United, bad team at the Cottage, like that probably wasn't.
Yeah, I wonder if there's... I think the thing is that there's like quite an obvious managerial like upgrade across the entirety of the Premier League,
100%.
right? So like I was talking about this yesterday on the radio, but we were making a point that you could say that there's probably a case to make for like 12 of the managers in the Premier League be included in the Manager of the Year conversation. Now I think that would probably be a step beyond like Marco Silva or Vitor Pereira, but you'd look at that and say, well, the way that Pereira turned around Wolves in the second half of the season has been absolutely magnificent. Like you'd look at some of the results that Marco Silva has put together. You're talking about Fulham's record points total. You're looking at, you know, those results in the Cup up to that point and beating Liverpool at home and beating Manchester United in the FA Cup and all of those things. When you put it all together, you're like, yeah, good season. Like if you step out, zoom out, and if you're looking at, let's say, Bournemouth, right? Bournemouth might well finish below us this season now. And if that comes to fruition, then there is an element that we were talking about Antonio Iraola in the Manager of the Year conversation, but he's obviously had flaws as well. And Bournemouth spent a lot of money last summer. They got a lot of money in from the likes of Solanke's, you know, and all of that, but they then went and spent again. And Iraola looked brilliant in the first half of the season. They burnt out in the second. Like, and just when it kind of mattered in terms of their European dreams, it's come up a little bit short. Fine. But like when you're talking about these, would you swap a Silva for an Iraola at this point? With the way that he plays, maybe, but I don't think you'd be getting a signal. Like, I don't think if you swap them overnight, obviously Bournemouth fans will be upset because they've just lost a manager that they've finally got a connection with. But I don't think that in the long run, either of those teams would do too much worse, right? Like, I think they're on a pretty similar part. And I think you can kind of start to roll in a couple of managers all the way up to like Hurstler's first season at Brighton. Hasn't been without its faults, but it looks like they're going to end up finishing 8th. That's not going to be probably enough for Europe, but it might, you know, end up still being a good season on their behalf. It's been a good season from a bad start from a Brentford perspective, you know, bar last weekend. You're looking at all of these things, even Nottingham Forest, who have been in the Champions League spots all year long, might end up 7th. Right now, that's going to be European football, so that's absolutely fine. They would have bitten your hand off for that at the start of the year. But the expectation changes when you're 3rd for the entire season and you finish 7th. Like, however that shakes out, I think you can make an argument for like almost all of the top half of the Premier League to say their manager has been absolutely exceptional. And then you go down to Glasner at Palace, who's obviously won them their first ever trophy. Pereira at Wolves, who's, you know, I think had a very, very good second half of the season. David Moyes is, you know, maybe the overachievements at the start of it were overblown a little bit and the kind of slide hasn't been, but it's still been a massive improvement of where they were before. So outside of the relegation 3, Manchester United, Tottenham Hotspur and West Ham United, I think you can make a point that almost every single one of those managers has achieved success in some way. And then when you're kind of looking at that, you're going, well, do you twist at that point when you know the quality bar is so high that actually one misstep and you could find yourself in real trouble at the bottom? So whilst I don't think Silva is perfect, and I do think that there are different elements of this and you can make criticisms of various elements of things, the twist at this point, I think, is far, far riskier than the stick.
I definitely agree. And I do feel like, I said this on a pod a few weeks ago, but I certainly, in my moments of frustration, forget how it was 5 years ago. 5 years ago was, 2020, just coming up, about to have one of the worst Premier League seasons in the world, scored 9 goals at home. Yeah. Like, it could be so different.
Was bleak.
It was bleak. I just think I
We
agree.
probably wouldn't have given up so many one-goal leads. I mean, look, we wouldn't have had the one-goal leads to give up. It's probably
No, we
worth
weren't-
pointing
we
that
weren't
out.
scoring.
But we definitely wouldn't have given up as many.
No, absolutely. But I do feel very, as much as there are frustrations with Silva, I always come back to it. I think when he goes, he will either go in sort of with our applause at the end and a sort of, obviously I'm comparing them, they've achieved similar things like Jurgen Klopp style send off, or he will get poached by a bigger club, and I will wish him the best.
Silva does have one less Premier League than Jurgen Klopp, but apart from that, it's pretty similar, right?
Yeah, I think I've got a pretty much identical record, actually. And I know which one's the better manager. This actually leads us on really nicely to our final question for today, which is from Jeff Taylor. In the hypothetical world where Silva leaves in the summer, the likes of Will Still or Kieran McKenna could become available, as well as potential others. Who might be the best fit for Fulham?
Yeah, I mean, I really like Will Still, but I think he probably needs a stint in the Championship. I think he's going to
Yeah.
go to Southampton, and I think that's quite a nice fit, actually, for him to continue to build his reputation, because he's had some good moments, but also some slides in France. And I think that the good moments were covered so heavily. It's a bit like what you were saying about visibility. The slides and the end of seasons weren't covered so heavily, and they did exist. I think if I was going to go and poach from France, I would probably take a look at Liam Rossigna, who obviously has links to the club already and has done a good job with Strasbourg, although they also slid out from a position of real strength with 2 games to go looking at Europe. They did also slide out of that equation late on, but I think he's done a good job with that team. The one I would genuinely be like, okay, that's an interesting move, is Francesco Farioli, who has just left Ajax. Now, we've all seen what's happened with Ajax in their last 5 games of the season and dropping the title from being 5 points ahead and 9 points ahead. But actually, the way that he has managed that side and what he took over, he lost so many good players and actually turned them back into a bit of a defensive unit again. It's a different style of football, and it's not quite as easy on the eye, but I think he's a very, very good manager who is going to get some interesting jobs at some places. Thiago Motta, I think, has been done a disservice by what happened at Juventus. I think he's a very, very good manager. I think you could look at someone like a Cesc Fabregas or an Imanol Alguacil, who has just left Real Sociedad and has arguably been their most successful manager in the kind of modern era. Cesc, I think, is going to want a bigger job than Fulham. I think the Roma and Leverkusen might come hunting for him. But Alguacil, I think you could potentially do a job with. And look, Basque managers in the Premier League have tended to do quite well, right? Like it's not been completely across the board, but it's pretty successful as a kind of rule of thumb. So Alguacil, I think, is a really, really interesting one. He did a very good job with Real Sociedad. He brought a lot of players through from their academy, brought in some very interesting names and moulded them to a side that went and won the Copa del Rey a couple of years ago and have consistently challenged for European football. Him or Farioli would be the managers that I would be looking to if Fulham and Marco Silva were to part ways. But again, I think that sticking probably remains my preferred option. But there's just a few names in the ether there who are potentially available this summer.
Yeah, the Ajax drop-off would redefine the end of Fulham slide, end of season slide.
Yeah, exactly.
I've got, this is a
But
very...
if it meant we finished second, I'd probably live with it.
Yeah, I guess I would take second place. This is an incredibly sensationalist question from me. And it's one off the back of this. So tonight, as we record, it's the Europa League final. And I would say both of those managers, it's not a given that they stay next season. I think Ruben Amorim will stay for what it's worth. But I think Ange Postecoglou will go unless they win. I do think they will keep him if they win.
I don't. I think he walks away either way.
Do you think?
Yeah.
Either way, would say one or two of those managers are back on the market and Marco Silva is taken off our hands. Are you interested in either?
Yeah, I'm interested in both.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, look, I loved what Amorim did at Sporting, and I spent a lot of time talking about what it looked like and how he turned that club around from an absolute I can't tell you how much of a mess Sporting were in before Amorim took over. Like, there were fans invading the training ground on the behalf of the president to beat players with bats. Like, they had to lose players who were just crying and walking away and be like, cancel my contract, I cannot play for this club anymore. And within a year and a half, he made them Portuguese champions for the first time in 20 years. He did such a wonderful job with that team. And yes, they have a little bit more in terms of, maybe not budget, but in terms of can you allure from smaller clubs within the pond than Fulham did. But the way he brought through the likes of Polinia and the way he brought through the likes of Mateus, and then he did it all again while selling all of those players. And that was even more impressive, I think, the second time round. I've got huge faith in Amorim. I think Postecoglou will be fun. Like, I don't think that there would be the same kind of level of scrutiny and thus the same kind of level of him losing the head a little bit towards the end of it. I love Ange, right? Like, and so there are elements of this that obviously there is a level of bias. I spent a lot of time covering when he was at Celtic, and the football that Celtic team played was absolutely unbelievable. Like, they played the best football I've seen in a long, long time from any team in the Scottish top flight. So looking what he achieved there with kind of a smaller budget, with bringing in players who were less kind of household names, maybe there's something that you could translate into a kind of a smaller club than Tottenham in terms of where Fulham are. You know, if they just bought a load of players from the J League, Tottenham, then I think that everyone would have been up in arms, right? They would have been like, this is not good enough. These are not the players we want to see coming through the door, etc. But equally, I do think that whilst there are serious problems with the injury levels and that, I think that Fulham's medical team have stood up really well to questions about injuries in the past. I do think that he would find success, and he will find success where he goes next, I think. And that is going to be very interesting to see what that is and what that job is. But I got a funny feeling he goes to the Bundesliga.
Interesting. Well, if I'm honest, I hope I'm not watching tonight knowing that the losing finalist is coming to Fulham.
No, I would be very surprised if either of the losing finalists ended up at Fulham next season. Let's put it that way.
No, ditto. Thank you so much, Jack.
No, thank you, Elizabeth. It's been a real pleasure. It's been a lot of fun.
A lot of fun looking back at one of the best wins of the season and looking forward to our final game at the Cottage. It's going to be an emotional one, even if it's not Tom Cairney's last game. We can hope. And thank you for watching the Thursday Club. The team will be back soon with the quick take after the City game, and then a lot more content over the summer to keep all your Fulham senses satisfied. You Whites.
You Whites!
Thank you.